العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. ربكم أعلم بكم، إن يشأ يرحمكم أو إن يشأ يعذبكم. إن يشأ يرحمكم أو إن يشأ يعذبكم وما أرسلناك عليهم وكيلا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات اللهم صل على محمد. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, a second loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajah. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajah. The topic that we've prepared to discuss tonight, inshallah, is the topic of addressing judgment and being judgmental in our communities. This idea of judging others in terms of their conduct, judging others in terms of their behavior, judging others in terms of their character, is one that is very prevalent within our communities. It has plagued our communities in many ways. And it is one that ties in with the person that we are commemorating tonight and the companion that we are commemorating tonight in Hurr. Hurr was one whose past was not the brightest of any of the companions that were there with Abu Abdullah. Hurr was the one at the end of the day, historically, who created this whole event of Karbala. In many ways, he was the one who pushed the Imam into this plain of Karbala, as he was receiving letters from his commanders telling him to push the caravan of the Imam into a land that is barren, into a place where there is no water. At the end of the day, it was Hurr who did all of this. And it was his troops at his command who took care of all of this for his bigger commanders, like the Ubaydullah ibn Ziyads of the world and the Yazids of the world. And yet you find when Hurr, he changed his lifestyle and he changed his path and he came back to the path of Abu Abdullah, the way Imam al-Hussein embraced him with open arms, there seems to have not been any form of judgment when it came to his past. It's almost as if he was always a companion of Abu Abdullah, even though up until a couple days ago, up until the 10th of Muharram, Hurr was of course on the wrong side of this battle. Neither did Abu Abdullah judge him in the sense of rejecting him because of his shortcomings that he had in the past. Nor do you find the companions of Imam al-Hussein having conversations with one another and saying, we cannot accept this person as one of our own because of what he's done up until now. No, you find that they welcomed him with open arms. And this brings us to the topic of judgment. This topic of judgment that many times we hear, we think about this famous pillar of faith that we have, the belief in the day of judgment. This is a belief that all of us agree on within the different schools of thought within Islam. You believe in the day of judgment. You believe in Yawmul Qiyamah. Beyond that, if you look at other religions, other Abrahamic religions, other ideologies out there, many times they will also have traces of this same belief as well. In the Abrahamic religions, you have the day of judgment. In other religions, you'll have traces of this idea that the human being is supposed to live his life in this world. There are certain teachings for him. There are certain standards for him. He has to strive to act upon these duties and these teachings. And after his opportunity comes to an end, then he is going to be judged based on how much he was able to act upon these duties. This is a concept that we already believe in Islam. And in fact, you find in the verses of the Quran, left and right, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings up the day of judgment. So much so that the Quran many times doesn't just speak of the general idea that you and I are going to be judged. It also speaks of the details of the events that will take place on that day. Recite a salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajah. One more salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajah. Not only does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speak about the general concept of Yawmul Qiyamah, He speaks about the details, even the conversations that people will have on that day. The good people will have with one another. The good people will have with those who were bad and they are ending up in the hellfire, and so on and so forth. And therefore you find all of the names that are given to this day of judgment, one way or another, they relate to the idea that you and I are going to be judged for our deeds. We refer to this day of judgment as Yawmul Qiyamah, the day that you are going to be resurrected for. You are going to be risen in. Risen for what? Resurrected for what? Because you are going to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you and I, and we are going to be judged based on our deeds. We say this day is Yawmul Hisab. It is the day where your deeds are taken into account. This is a form of judgment. We say this day is Yawmul Fasla, when the good and the bad are separated from one another. This is a form of judgment. Therefore, this is a belief that we believe in, and it is fundamental to our faith. The discussion starts to take a little bit of a turn now when that judge, the one who is doing that judgment, is no longer Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is no longer the one who created all of us, yet it is the judgment of one human being for another human being. This is where the discussion starts to become a bit complex. And tonight's topic, I will mention this at the very beginning, it is a complex and nuanced topic, a difficult one, if I'm being honest, to tackle. So inshallah, if anyone hears a portion of the talk, please make sure you watch the whole thing so that you have a complete understanding. Otherwise, there will be misunderstandings, and this is a sensitive topic that we are discussing tonight. When this judge ends up being another human being, things get complex now. And many times you'll hear people, maybe yourself, myself, we might turn to another person and say, you don't have the right to judge me. Don't judge me. Don't speak to me in a judgmental manner. Yes? This is where our discussion begins. And this is a critical topic because it's a problem in our communities on one hand. On the other hand, when you speak to people who study human behavior and human psychology, they will speak about the negative effects of judgment. How detrimental it can be if someone is going through a struggle, if someone has a difficulty in their life and they feel judged. Because of that, for example, they don't reach out to get help. Or if they do reach out, they feel judged and a shame builds in their hearts. And this pushes them away from community. It pushes them away from that circle in which they felt that shame, in which they felt judged. And when they are isolated and by their own, their struggle becomes even more difficult. Yes, a person who's dealing with a particular addiction, a particular compelling behavior, for example, if he's isolated, if he's by himself, if he can't reach out to get help, it becomes even more difficult for him to deal with that situation. So it's a topic that has multiple implications for us within our communities. Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into this topic by posing the following questions. Number one, when someone says, you or me or whoever says this, don't judge me, you don't have the right to judge me, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can judge me. What does this mean? What are the different interpretations of this one line that we hear so often? Number two, where does Quran and Hadith reference the idea of judging others? And in Quran and Hadith, have we been given the permission to make judgment about the deeds of others and the characters of others or not? Number three, has Islam given me the permission to scorn other people, to speak down to them because of their shortcomings, especially those shortcomings of them that they have not repented from, those shortcomings of them that they are still going based off of that lifestyle? Does Islam give me that permission or not? Number 4, if Islam promotes an environment that is judgment-free, if Islam promotes an environment where those individuals in that environment are not to judge one another, does this mean that Islam wants me, for example, to then feel the freedom to share my shortcomings with everybody? If others are to not judge me, does that mean in turn that Islam wants me to feel free to share my shortcomings publicly and openly? Or is that also something that Islam does not want? And number 5, and finally, if I find myself in a situation where I feel like the people around me, they are judging me, I feel like they are dealing with me in a judgmental manner, what is it that Islam wants me to do in those situations? And what can I do to deal with a situation like this? Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into these 5 questions with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil faraj. Allow me to begin from here. The first thing we have to realize, the first thing we need to understand is that the reality is we live in a society today and we live in times today where many times these little short sentences, these one-liners, these mottos, these slogans, these hashtags, they're thrown around. And the reality is the information that we get from the outside world or over social media or whatever the case might be, many times it's very limited. Yes, it's in small bits of information. We deal with, for example, platforms on social media that if you wanted to explain something, the app may not even allow you to go much further. They say you have to make your point quickly, concisely, and you have to move on. There's not too much room for too much explanation here. And there's a pro to this and there's a con to it. The pro to it is that at the end of the day, not everything, like we were talking about the first night, has to turn into a 2-hour lecture. If you want to make a point, it doesn't have to be 2 hours. It can be a couple minutes. The con to it, on the other hand, though, is that you don't necessarily have the opportunity to get an explanation for what someone is saying. Someone says a one-liner, someone has a slogan, you might agree with it or disagree with it, whereas your understanding of this one line is very different from the understanding that the other person has. This catchphrase that this person is using has one understanding of it, you're understanding it in a totally different way. Whereas Islam, with one understanding of that phrase, will completely agree. With the other understanding of it, Islam will completely disagree. This is the world that we live in. Yes? Things are so short and compressed, whereas you never even get a chance to see what exactly does this person mean. It says, don't judge me. What does this mean? What does it mean only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can judge me? Because depending on the interpretation of this line and what exactly you mean, Islam might completely agree with you or Islam might completely disagree with you. And that is the case with many other things that we hear nowadays. You hear people, they say, you have to live in the moment. To live in the now. Yes? Well, depends what you mean by that. In some senses, Islam completely agrees with that. In some senses, no, Islam completely disagrees with that. If what you mean by living in the moment is don't worry about the past, don't worry about the future, forget about worries and concerns and planning for the future, just stick to the now. Well, Islam is completely disagreeing with that, if that's what you mean. It sounds cool, of course, but Islam completely disagrees with it. Depends what you mean by it. Yes, we say, you have to stay true to who you are. Shouldn't change for anybody. What does that mean? Does that mean in terms of your fundamental values? Well then, yes, Islam 100% agrees with you. But if you mean you're never going to work on yourself, you're just going to say, this is who I am, you deal with it, well then that's just going to end in divorce. That's how that works, yes? That's a recipe for disaster. So depending on what you mean by it, Islam might completely agree with you or Islam might completely disagree with you. And so you have to understand, when we say these one-liners and these catchphrases, though they're fine, it's a part of the life that we live nowadays, we have to take time to see what exactly is meant by this. And that brings us to this particular phrase and the concept of judgment. When someone says, don't judge me, and this, of course, I say this, I might have been in a position where I have said this phrase, you might have been in a position where you say this phrase, it's a phrase that we use in our terminology nowadays. When someone says this, generally there are 3 different meanings that this person is referring to. Depending on which meaning he is referring to or she is referring to, Islam might agree or Islam might completely disagree with what this person has to say. The first meaning that comes to mind when someone says, you don't have the right to judge me, you shouldn't judge me, is that this person is saying, listen, no matter what I do in my life, you have no right to make any moral judgment as it relates to my deeds. I give charity or I don't give charity. You don't have the right to say this is a good deed or a bad deed. I pray or I don't pray. You don't have the right in the context of Islam, yes? In the context of the person who is Muslim. You don't have the right to say this is a good thing or a bad thing. I fast or I don't fast. I commit this haram or I don't commit this haram. You have no right to make any moral judgment on the actions that I do and the deeds that I carry out. It's my business and you don't have the right to do that. And if you do that, you are then judgmental. You are judging me. This is the first meaning. Sometimes people refer to it in this sense of the word. Sometimes no, what this person is saying is, listen, you can judge this aspect or that aspect, or you can have your own moral opinion about what I do or I don't do, but don't judge my whole character. Don't take one shortcoming of mine and then say I'm terrible, I'm a bad person because I lack in this specific area of my life. Don't take a particular deed of mine and then judge my whole character based on it. You don't have the right to say how much value I have in the eyes of Allah in terms of my overall character. Yes, you can point to this aspect of my life, say this is good or this is wrong or this is good. That's a separate thing. But as a whole, you don't have the right to judge me. You don't have the right to sit there and say, for example, this person will not make it into heaven, na'udhu billah. You don't have that right to make this overall judgment as it relates to the character of a person. This is the second meaning. Sometimes people, when they say don't judge me, this is actually what they mean. Then there's a third meaning. This third meaning is different from the first and the second. This person says, listen, all I'm saying is that the tone with which you speak to me is not a judgmental tone. What does that mean? That means that you don't speak to me from a moral high horse. You don't speak to me as if you're perfect, I'm the only one who's ever committed sins. You don't speak to me as if you're the best servant of God walking on earth, whereas I'm the one who is polluted, and I am the one who is fasiq, and I am the one who commits these sins. No, you make mistakes too. Don't speak as if you walk on the wings of angels when you walk, and then I'm like this horrible person. No, we all make mistakes. Sometimes this third meaning is what is intended. Based on which meaning is intended, we will now have to see which meaning does Islam agree with, which meaning does Islam disagree with. Recite a salawat, please. As it relates to the first meaning, when someone says, I will do whatever I want to do, no one has the right to look at any of my deeds and make any moral judgment about any of my deeds. Does Islam agree with this, or does Islam disagree with this perspective? The reality is that Islam completely disagrees with this perspective. Why? Because the reality is that Islam is nothing but these moral judgments as it relates to the deeds of a human being. Please pay attention. We're not talking about the character of a human being. That is a separate discussion. We will get to that later. We're talking about the deeds of the human being. If I see someone, and I'm not assuming, by the way, that's another thing. The assumptions we make is another problem. That's a topic for another time. We don't have time to go into that. Assume that you know for fact that this person doesn't do this. Or yourself, maybe even myself, for example. I don't pray, for example. Can I pass moral judgment on this, that this is a wrong thing? This is not a good thing? From the Islamic perspective, this is not only something that's allowed, it is necessary to pass that moral judgment on the deed. I'm emphasizing once again, not on the character. I don't know how many times I have to emphasize this, because there can be many misunderstandings. On the deed itself, on the action itself. Someone prays, or for example, someone doesn't fast. Can I look at this deed that this person is doing, or the lack thereof, and say, this is wrong? Can I do that? Not only in Islam can you do that, in fact, the moment you embrace this faith, you already pass that judgment. Because Islam, a big part of it are these moral teachings. A big part of it are the do's and the don'ts. A big part of it is what are you supposed to do to be morally acceptable in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The moment you said, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, moment you declared your belief in the Prophet as a messenger of God, you automatically declare judgment on thousands of deeds. Whether you know it or you don't know it, that's what you did. Because this message and this religion came to say what? If you pray, this is wrong. Or if you don't pray, this is wrong, for example. If you have bad akhlaq in the house, this is wrong. This is evil. If you pray, it's so important, you have to do it. Fasting is so important, you have to do it. These are the tenets of Islam, some of them. Some of them are more detailed, like these that I'm mentioning. Some of them are bigger, many of the things that have to do with dealing with other people. Yes, not deceiving people. If you deceive someone, Islam has come to say this is wrong, you're not supposed to do it. So the moment you said Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, the moment you said Shahadatain, you already passed moral judgment on all of these deeds. You already looked at drinking and said this is a bad thing to do. You already looked at adultery, forgive me, and you said this is a bad thing to do. You already looked at praying 5 times a day. You said this is something that's absolutely necessary. Otherwise, then how are you believing in this religion? These are the tenets of the religion. These are the things that the religion has to offer. So when we speak about someone says, you know what, whatever I do in terms of my deeds, no one has the right to judge me. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the right to judge me. In reality, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already passed judgment on all of these deeds. Not the character, but the deeds. You will never as a Muslim have the right to pass judgment on anything unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already passed judgment on it. And when it comes to these deeds, that's exactly what He's done. That's why He sent the messenger to us. That's why He sent the Prophet to us. To tell you and I that these deeds are good, these deeds are bad. If you strip Islam of these moral judgments, there will be nothing left of Islam. I can do anything and everything and say, you know what, Islam agrees with what I'm doing. Because there's no moral judgments in this religion in terms of the deeds. No, not only is this part of your faith, not only is this okay, in fact, it is part of your faith as well. When you look into the rulings of our maraji', you will find this ruling, for some of them at least, that they will say, you know what, the first level of amr bil ma'ruf, the first level of enjoining the good, is not actually pulling this guy aside and talking to him. That's actually the second level. If you look in hadith, this is the second level. So what's the first level? What am I supposed to do? What comes before that? I thought I'm supposed to, in certain situations, when certain conditions are met, this friend of mine, husband of mine, wife of mine, someone I have a personal connection with, I pull them aside kindly, compassionately, whatever the case might be. I thought that's what enjoining the good, forbidding the evil is. Yes, that's one form of it, though it has very particular conditions, and we don't do a good job with that. That's a separate discussion. The first level of amr bil ma'ruf is that when you come across something that is wrong, that you acknowledge that this is wrong. Deep down in your heart, you say, you know what, this is wrong. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not happy with this. And the likes of Ayatollah Sistani and many other scholars, you will see this in their books. They say out of obligatory precaution, out of ihtiyat, you are supposed to do that when you come across munkar. Before it even gets to, let me talk to this guy or don't talk to this guy. No. Before it even gets to that, you are supposed to acknowledge deep down in your heart, what he's doing is wrong. I don't agree with it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not happy with this. Not only is it allowed, this is part of your faith. This is part of your religion. You say, but Shaykh, I don't want to pass judgment on people. This is not your judgment. Who are you? Who am I? This is not our judgment. This is the judgment of Allah that He sent to us through His Prophet. He was the one who came and told you these deeds are good deeds, those deeds are bad deeds. Otherwise, if you take this away from the religion, what's left of the religion at that point? There's nothing left of the religion. And sometimes when people say, when they say only Allah can judge me, what they mean is, don't come to me and say Islam agrees with this aspect of your life and Islam does not agree with this aspect of your life. And Islam does not agree with this perspective. This is that interpretation of judgment that Islam does not agree with. In the sense that moral judgment has to be there. If you take that away from Islam, there's nothing left for Islam. Then what is Islam? Just something you believe in. But can you ever look at someone and say what he's doing is good or wrong? No, you can't ever do that. What religion is this? You look at the movement of Abu Abdullah. You look at the other side, Yazid, la'natullahi alayh, but you can't say who's good, who's bad. This first form where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has passed the judgment, yes, you can pass that judgment. It's part of your faith actually to do so. Yes? And this is why the verses of the Quran tell the Prophet, this verse that I recited at the beginning, رَبُّكُمْ أَعْلَمُ بِكُمْ إِنْ يَشَأْ يَرْحَمْكُمْ أَوْ إِنْ يَشَأْ يُعَذِّبْكُمْ وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ عَلَيْهِمْ وَكِيلًا. Ya Rasulullah, we never sent you to be in charge of people. You're not the one passing these judgments. We're the ones who pass judgments. Why? Because whatever the Prophet said is good or bad, he wasn't making that judgment independently. This was a judgment that was coming from where? It was coming from a divine source. Recite a salawat, please. Moving on to the second meaning when someone says, don't be judgmental, don't judge me. And that is this. You can judge my deeds. You can look at the deeds of a person and say this is good or bad, this is wrong or good or bad or evil or whatever the case might be. But you cannot look at the character of a person and evaluate where they stand in the eyes of Allah as a whole. Now we're moving into scary territory because we're not talking about the deeds anymore. We're talking about the character of a person. We're talking about the value of a human being in the eyes of Allah. This area is where Islam does not give you that permission at all. Does not give you that permission at all. And here's the interesting thing. Forget about judging others. Here's the real question. Can you really even judge yourself? Do you even know where you stand in the eyes of God? At the very least, you can say you don't know for sure. So if you don't know where you stand in the eyes of God, then how could you possibly pass judgment on the lives of others as a whole, not their deeds, but as a whole, and say this is how much value Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to this person. This person will be in heaven, this person will be in hellfire. You don't know that. You don't even know where you stand in His eyes, let alone others. Yes, there is one specific category in Islam where you can pass judgment and say this person does not hold value in the eyes of Allah. It's one category. And again, even in this category, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has passed that judgment technically. You're just acting upon His judgments. Which category is that? The category of human beings who fundamentally and knowingly turn away from the message of Allah. Not the one who accepts it and has shortcomings, which is 99% of people in our communities. No, the one who knowingly turns away from the truth. This person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, he has no value in my eyes. This person, if he leaves this world in this state, he will definitely not make it to heaven. And the Quran is so clear about this, there's no hiding this. Verse 40 from Surah Al-A'raf puts it very beautifully. He says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا. Those who knew the truth and they called our messenger a liar. They did takdeeb of our ayat and our signs. وَاسْتَكْبَرُوا عَنْهَا. And they turned away from it out of arrogance. He knew this was the truth, but he turned away from it out of arrogance. لَا تُفَتَّحُ لَهُمْ أَبْوَابُ السَّمَاءِ. The doors of the heavens will never open upon this person. وَلَا يَدْخُلُونَ الْجَنَّةِ. And this person will never enter into heaven. And then the Quran uses a terminology and an analogy that is extremely beautiful. He says, حَتَّى يَلِجَ الْجَمَلُ فِي سَمِّ الْخِيَاطِ. It is impossible for this person to enter into heaven the same way it is impossible for you to take a camel. This was a saying they used to use in Arabic at that time. You take a camel and have it pass through the eye of a needle. It's impossible. Can't do that. You can barely get the thread through it, yes? If you have a grandmother at home or grandfather at home, yes? Sometimes they'll ask you for help, right? Maybe they're elder, their hands are not as, solid as they used to be. They say, can you come thread this needle for you? And then the Quran says, if you can have a camel pass through that small little eye of the needle at the tip of it, yes, this person will make it into heaven too. What does that mean? Impossible. It's not possible. The Quran says, أَلَيْسَ فِي جَهَنَّمَ مَثْوًى لِلْمُتَكَبِّرِينَ? You don't think there's a place for the mutakabbirin, the one who knowingly turns away from the truth? You don't think there's a place for him in the hellfire? Of course there's a place for him in the hellfire. Of course, there's no doubt about it. The Quran is very clear about this. But here's the question though, how many of the people that you and I deal with are the type of people who've turned away from the message of God knowingly? Almost zero. Almost zero. Yes, you can point to someone like Yazid, say his person has problems on the Day of Judgment, yes? But 99% of the people you and I deal with, you can't make that call about them. At least not knowingly. At least not the type of people who knew the truth and turned away from it. Yes, this person may have not heard about this school of thought, that school of thought. He may have not heard about this religion, that religion. You have a lot of that. But knowingly, almost nobody. So then I can't sit there and make judgments on the characters of people. And this is one thing that our scholars, I'll go off script here a little bit. This is one thing our scholars have emphasized, especially when it comes to the majalis of Imam al-Hussein. That if you sit there and you judge the character of a person when he comes to attend, when he comes to take part, that's a serious problem. And Imam al-Hussein will have an issue with that. So when it comes to this second meaning of judgment, Islam would 100% agree with the one who says, do not judge me. You don't have the right to judge me. Don't speak to me in a judgmental way. 100% Islam in this sense of the word would agree with this person. Because this person is the person who has not knowingly turned away from the truth. So how do you know what his status is going to be on the Day of Judgment? I mean, you don't even know what your status is going to be on the Day of Judgment. So how do you know where this person is going to end up on the Day of Judgment? Moving on to the third meaning. Recite the salawat, please. The third meaning of judging another person, meaning that this person says, listen, the tone that you use with me, don't act like you're perfect. On this moral high horse, you're looking down upon the rest of us. No, you make mistakes too. You have shortcomings as well. Does Islam agree with this? 110%. And this is a problem we have again in our communities, where those who are more outwardly practicing of the religion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will test them with this. How will they speak to those who may not be outwardly as practicing? Will they use the wrong tone? This is a test. Sometimes one servant of Allah becomes a test for the other servant of Allah. This is a problem we have. And this is why you have a concept in Quran and Hadith known as the concept of ta'yir. Ta'yir. And the Hadith says, amongst multiple Hadith, the Hadith says, Man ayyara mu'minan. Man ayyara akhah. The one who scorns his brother or sister because of a mistake that they had done. How could you? What type of person are you? This is scorning, humiliating this person because of the mistakes that he's made. The hadith says, Lam yamut, this person himself won't die until he commits the same sin. Or in other hadith it says the same sin or a greater sin. You don't have the right, I don't have the right to sit there and scorn other people because of their mistakes, even if this person has not repented. When the person repents, it's easy, he's repented. Even when this person has not repented, you don't have the right to scorn them, humiliate them. Who gave you that right? No one gave you that right. Yes, you can speak to them if you have a personal connection with this person, you have a close and near and dear relationship with this person. Yes, as a friend, you speak to this person, and so on and so forth. But scorning other people, Islam has not given us that right. Yes, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God forbid, will punish you and I if we were to speak about it in that way. So when someone says, don't speak to me in this judgmental way, if this is what they mean, Islam 110% agrees with them. You don't have the right to speak to people in this judgmental way. As I move on, inshallah, The next point that I want to cover is this. If Islam promotes an environment, therefore, that it does not allow me to judge people in the second and third sense of the word, though it allows me, and it is part of my faith, to make moral judgments on the deeds that people commit, including my own deeds. Sometimes it's not someone else's deeds, sometimes it's your own deeds. If Islam doesn't want me to judge other people's character as a whole, if Islam doesn't want me to speak to others in a judgmental manner, does that in turn mean that Islam is saying, listen, come and speak of your sins and your shortcomings, no problem. Just be open about it. This is a judgment-free area, judgment-free zone. Speak, it's no problem publicly. You made this mistake. I committed this haram. You committed that mistake, this sin. I speak about it openly. No one should judge you. This is not also what Islam does not want. Islam says others should not judge you, but what you did was wrong. Understand this. This should not affect the relationship you have with others, but the relationship you had with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was severed because of these sins. You are hurting your relationship with Him. Between you and them, there doesn't have to be any shame or judgment. Between you and other human beings. But between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just between you and Him, you should feel ashamed. And I use this word shame very carefully, because it's a word that carries many connotations. But just in your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you should feel ashamed. And this is where the story of Hur shows itself so beautifully. Because when Hur came and he apologized, it's not like the other side did not judge him and then he walked about proudly. No, he realized what I did was horrible. What I did was terrible. And according to some narrations, this is the reason why he went to the battlefield first on that day. Because he felt so ashamed. Yes, others should not judge you and I, but that doesn't mean you and I are to share things in a public manner. No, this is between me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I made this mistake, it's between me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I will share it with those who can help me in cleaning it up. If I have a wrong habit, I have to share it with a counselor, I have to share it with a trusted individual, I'm going to share it with that person. Otherwise, I'm not going to normalize it in the community. I'm not going to put it out there and say, don't judge me. That's also what Islam doesn't want from us. They shouldn't judge, but you should keep this between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And moving on to the final point that we will make tonight, inshallah. If I find myself in a situation where I feel like the people around me, they are judging me. I attend a gathering, I feel judged there. I spend time with a group of friends, I feel judged there. Whatever the case might be. What does Islam tell me that I'm supposed to do in these situations? How can I cope with these types of situations? 2 points I'll make, and inshallah we will wrap up. Number one, first of all, understand that not everyone has the capacity to understand your lifestyle and your choices in life. Not everyone has that capacity. Not everyone can digest why you live your life the way you live it. Therefore, you have to be careful what you share of your life with others. And I know that social media is completely predicated on the opposite of this. But that's exactly the problem with it. Be careful what you share. Not everyone has the ability, the intellectual capability to understand where you're coming from, what your background is, what your story is, what happened to you when you were a child, so on and so forth. Not everyone has this ability. So if you feel like you attended somewhere, you were a part of something, this doesn't justify what they're doing, by the way. This is just in terms of how to protect yourself. Maybe some people don't have that capacity. Maybe don't share everything. When I put out something, thousands of people are going to see it. For example, you put out something, thousands of people are going to see it, and then you and I come back and say, oh, I felt judged. Well, of course. Doesn't justify what they're doing, yes? This is just how to protect yourself. No, the details of your life, why share everything with everybody? No. Some things people won't understand. You keep it to yourself. You keep it to a smaller group of friends, a trusted group of friends that you can share with them. That's number one. You have to be strategic about these things. You have to be smart about these things. Not everyone has the capability. You can't put yourself out there and get hurt because other people don't have the mental capability to digest where you come from, why you do the things that you do. That's number one. Number two is this. understand that every single human being will feel judged at one point of his life or another. This is a test that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests everyone with. It's not just you and me. He tests everyone with this test. The greatest prophets of God, they were also tested with this test as well. They were judged as well. And this is where this beautiful hadith from Biharul Anwar comes into the picture. This hadith in which Musa alayhi salam is having a conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, Ya Allah, and I'm of course rephrasing, rewording. He says, Ya Allah, I have a problem. I have something I need your help with. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, what is it? What is it that you need my help with? He says, Ya Allah, do something so that when people move away from my presence, they go in their own circles amongst themselves, that they don't speak negatively of me so much. Yes, they don't criticize me so much. They don't say bad things about me so much. Yes, if you can make it such that they say good things about me, that they're nice to me, they don't judge me, they don't say all these negative things about me. They don't do them of me is the wording of the hadith. Yes, do something that they won't say all these negative things, these harsh things. And the response that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to him is unbelievable. He said, Musa, I will not do for you that which I have not done for myself. I am God, and people speak negatively of me. I am God, I am the one who created all of these creatures, and yet they go behind and they speak negative things about me. And isn't that true? The moment He puts you through a difficulty, me through a difficulty, you and I, what do? We judge God. Say, He never liked me. He's never had my back anyways. The response came, Musa, I will not do for you that which I have not done for myself. I am God, and people say bad things about me. I am God, and people mischaracterize what I do. They judge me. They do them of me too. If I'm God and you're a human being, what do you expect for you? And Musa said, Ya Allah, I am happy to walk in your footsteps. I am happy to be like you. He understood this is a test that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts in front of all of us. So if you are dealing with a situation like this, understand that this is part of life, and this is a test that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you for if you pass the test, inshallah, with flying colors. With that, inshallah, we'll bring tonight's talk to an end. Rahimallahu man qara'a surat al-Fatihati ma'a as-salawati ala Muhammad.